Having a father-in-law who can do your taxes is quite an advantage.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think Senator Casey asked a really good question about jobs and wages, and how do we get past the point in this country where we see not just flat, but actually declining wages, higher expenses, middle-class squeeze. It's very real. And I think the testimony today has also been very helpful and raised a lot of issues. And I think the answer to it all is pretty obvious, which is tax reform. I mean, we need to do a number of things to get wages up, but one, every economic study I've seen says the same thing, which is if you do, in fact, go with a pro-growth tax reform on the business side, you're going to see the benefit go to the workers. The CBO study that many of you have seen shows 70% of the benefits going to go to higher wages and better benefits. And it's because American firms will be more competitive and they can pay more. And I just think we are missing the boat. And I hope this has been a wake-up call today for everybody to hear you all talk about the fact that even if we weren't already convinced that we're missing this opportunity to help the people we represent, those workers be able to have more opportunity for themselves and their families, that now it's getting even worse. Because everything you've said, and I've looked at your testimony, and also we've had a chance, some of us, to talk about these issues, is that if we don't move to do what we should do anyway, reform our code to make it more competitive, in effect, what will happen, not just in Europe, and as you know very well, Mr. Stack, because you've had to sit through probably dozens of meetings on this is not just OECD, this is the G20, this is, as Mr. Donalik has said, this is other countries as well. It's global now. They're going to go after these profits. So, in effect, we are having the worst of all worlds. We have a non-competitive tax code. It makes our workers have to compete with one hand tied behind their back, keeps their wages depressed, and yet we're also seeing now that because we haven't acted, other countries are moving in to try to grab those earnings themselves. And I hope that we can figure out a way on a bipartisan basis to fix this. And this committee has done a good job, I think, on the hearings, and I think the working group that Chairman Hatch asked us to convene was effective. Senator Schumer and I don't agree on everything, to say the least, but we did come up with an agreement on this issue, which is a framework to deal with tax reform. And I know there's some controversial parts of it, but I see a lot of consensus as to what we ought to do. And it does involve, as Mr. Stack has said, lowering the rate, broadening the base, but also on the international side, moving to this territorial type system before it's too late. I just have a couple quick questions, if I might. This nexus requirement that the BEPS project has now blessed, which is to say, if you do have an innovation box or a patent box in your country, you have to actually have the work connected with it. I assume you believe that's also going to draw additional jobs overseas, because companies that are now taking advantage and moving that intangible income overseas to lower tax jurisdictions are going to find, gosh, they have to actually send the researchers, the scientists, the infrastructure over there. Isn't that true?
Not necessarily, Senator. I think I want to make 2 points about the work we did at BEPS on the patent box. First of all, I think we all have to appreciate where we began. We began with countries like the UK that said if you just drop your paper patents into London, you can get a 10% rate and you can strip out of all our neighbors at 25 or 35% rate. Mm-hmm. And the OECD said, wait a second, that isn't having any domestic tax policy other than trying to strip income out of your neighbors. So the work at the OECD, and one premise we have at OECD is countries can have their own rates and countries can favor some income over others. But what we said was if you're going to have a separate rate for patent box type income, it has to be promoting a domestic policy of encouraging research and development. So do some research and development in country. Now, once you go there, you have to, there's two things. I don't think it's a given in the economic literature that the tax rate of where the research is done is the determining factor of where the research is done. People like to do research in the United States because we have universities and communities and synergies of all these great dynamic people we have here, number one. And number two, remember, if you're going to take your winners at 6.5% in Ireland, your income, you're going to have to take your deductions at 6.5% on your losers. So it's not a no-brainer for a company to say, I'm going where there's a 6.5% rate, because they have to make a judgment to give up the 28 or the 35% deduction in the U.S. as they do it. And finally, I don't also think it's a no-brainer that U.S. tax policy should race to the lowest tax rates of any neighbor we have, because that is a very expensive way to proceed given all of our competing fiscal demands. So I think the work we did on patent box was good from where we started and got to a better place. And I don't think it's necessarily going to drive U.S. researchers overnight and the ownership of IP out of the U.S. And I've had an opportunity to discuss some of this with my European counterparts. And a lot of them view their patent boxes as probably more beneficial to some of their small and medium enterprises that can benefit because they're doing the research there locally. Obviously something we should study and look at as we go forward, but I still think we did good work in that space.
Yeah, I'm not challenging your work, but I'm perplexed by your answer. I don't see how you can say this is good for the United States to have a BEPS project that ends up saying, for those American companies that do research overseas because they can take advantage of a patent box or an innovation box, now there's a nexus that they have to actually not just move, as you say, the paper patents overseas, they have to move the people overseas. How is that good for the United States of America?
Well, Congressman, we don't get to tell countries what rates they'd have.
No, I understand that, but I don't see how you can say that's good. I mean, that should make you want to look at our tax code and figure out a way to make our code more competitive.
Absolutely.
Which is the point that Senator Schumer and I made in our report, is having talked to a lot of experts, including at least one member of your panel. You know, this is the reality. This is what's happening. Now, we may not like it. And you're right, other countries have the right to do it, I suppose, but that doesn't mean that we should sit back and simply not react, because I do think you're going to see an erosion, not just of inversions and foreign takeovers, which, by the way, doubled last year in value as compared to the year before, and this year is on track probably to go up another 70, 80%. But I think you're going to see not just the paper patents, but the researchers move overseas. That just seems to me logical. Well,
Senator, that's why the president has proposed lowering the rate, broadening the base, and doing a whole host of other things to make us more competitive and pro-growth in the world. And so I was answering in isolation the patent box question, but I fully agree with you. We need to do better at international tax reform to make ourselves more competitive, and competitive. And on that, there is bipartisan agreement. So I fully agree with you.
On the well, my time has expired. I apologize. One of my colleagues has now arrived, but I would like to talk to you more at some point about this notion of these retroactive tax increases you talked about, and all three of you talked about being creditable and what that means for tax reform, because one of the very specific concerns, obviously, we have is that in our proposal, there is a deemed repatriation, and as Treasury agrees with us on that. And obviously, that deemed repatriation will be a lot less to be able to pay for moving to a territorial system if there are creditable tax credits against those. And so that's my biggest concern, is the impact of this specifically on tax reform. And just a quick, do you all agree with that as a concern? And is that one reason for us to move quickly?
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator. I believe it's something to consider, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.